How's it going here? Welcome back to another camera comparison video. And today I've got the OnePlus Nord 2 up against the Xiaomi 11T. Now they both feature the Mediatek Dimensity 1200 chipset, and the main differentiator is going to be the main camera sensor in each, with the Nord 2 featuring a 50 megapixel sensor with optical image stabilization. It's the Sony IMX766, which is featured in some popular phones that have just launched, like the Xiaomi 12, OPPO Find N, and Vivo X70 Pro, not the Pro Plus. The Xiaomi 11T features a 108 megapixel main sensor. It does not have optical image stabilization in it, and they both feature 8 megapixel ultra wide angle cameras. And so I think this will be a very evenly matched battle. They both have the same chipset, and they're both about the same price point, maybe $400 to $500 depending on where you purchase from. I'm starting out this video with the rear cameras with that portrait mode effect, so you can see some artificial background blur going on right now. And like I always do, I'll show you a bunch of photos and videos in both good and low light conditions, so you can decide for yourself which of these two camera systems might be best for you. So go ahead and check out all the photos and videos and let me know what you think. So here's a rear video camera test on the OnePlus Nord 2 and Xiaomi 11T. As you can see right there, they are both actively recording from the rear facing cameras. And this is at 4K 30 frames per second with the ultra wide angle camera to start out on each. So I'll just pan around here to give you a feel for how these ultra wide angle cameras compare here side by side. Check out all the color reproduction with the blues and the greens here, and how they handle the exposure with the shade and back up into the light. So let's go ahead and move into the main lens now. So here is the main lens on each of the two phones here. I'll do the same thing. I'll just pan around to give you a feel for how these look like here in this particular setting. You check out the colors and how they handle the shadows and the exposure as I pan down into the shade and back up into the light. And let's move over here to the right and we'll test zoom there out on the cell tower. So let's move in here slowly to about, let's go to a 2 times. That's a 2 times digital zoom on the OnePlus Nord 2, and then let's go to a 2 times digital here on the 11T. And then we can move all the way into maybe, let's stop at maybe a 5 times zoom here on the Nord 2, and then another 5 times here on the 11T. And there we go. So that's how 5 times digital compares on each. And then let's move into max zoom. So that's gonna be 10 times here on the Nord 2. And then let's go, I think that should be, let's see, 6 times there on the 11T. So max 10 times digital on the Nord and 6 times digital on the Xiaomi 11T at 4K. So let's go ahead and back both of these out to 1 times here. Got to pinch back, and same thing on the 11T. So unfortunately no tapped to get to specific focal lengths. So you just got to either use the slider or just pinch. And let's go ahead and test autofocus here on the post with the Nord 2 first. And let's see if it focuses up. And there we go, I think. Let's see, there we go. And away, and try one more time. There we go. So I think it's getting the right focal length or right distance from the subject, and it'll focus in. And let's go ahead and try it with the 11T. Much faster autofocus there with the 11T. And again, and one more time. So snappier autofocus there from what I can see on the 11T. And then let's go ahead and start walking to test stabilization here in 4K on both of these phones here as I walk through the path. And then let's go ahead and jog to try to stress out that stabilization here. So there you go, 4K video test on both phones. So this will be a front-facing video test on the OnePlus Nord 2 and Xiaomi 11T. As you can see, they're both recording from the front-facing cameras. And I have these both in their portrait video mode to just start out with, so you can see what this artificial background blur effect looks like here. And the 11T does not have any stabilization options with the bokeh mode on, so it's best to just film it stationary. And the OnePlus Nord 2 does have a stabilization option with the bokeh effect on, but I have it off right now to give you the max effect so you don't have that super cropped in zoom factor. And it's probably best to film this stationary. You can turn on a stabilization on the Nord 2 if you want with the portrait effect, but then you're gonna get a lot of crop. So I'm just gonna pan around here to give you a feel for what this portrait effect looks like here in some changing light. You can see as the lighting gets harsher what that does to the video quality and what that does to the portrait effect here. But if you're in some pretty good, well-controlled light outdoors, it actually looks pretty good on both of these phones. And so you can get some nice background blur if you want from the front-facing camera on each of these two phones. Let's come back with no effect and some stabilization. Okay, and so this is with the normal front-facing camera. They top out at 1080p, 30 frames per second. No portrait effect here, and you can see they're both stabilized, so there's gonna be a lot more crop on the both phones actually. So let's go ahead and pan around so you can get a feel for what these kind of cameras look like here. Again, in the changing light conditions with no kind of portrait effects or anything else, just straight up filming with the front-facing cameras. And then we'll go ahead and start walking so you can see what the stabilization looks like here side by side on both of these two phones from this front-facing camera. So let me know what you think about the options, effects, and how these front-facing cameras look here on the OnePlus Nord 2 and Xiaomi 11T. Alright, so here's a low light video test on the OnePlus Nord 2 and Xiaomi 11T, and this is the ultra wide angle lens to start out on each. And both of these phones limit the ultra wide angle lens to 1080p 30 frames per second, and the Nord 2 does not have any stabilization while in ultra wide for whatever reason. That's why it has a much wider field of view. There's no crop on it like the 11T for any kind of electronic stabilization. As you can see, it looks a little bit more shaky on the Nord than it does probably on the 11T, even on this mount here. So that is the ultra wide angle lens on each and some of the limitations that they have on these phones. Let's switch over to the main lens right now. And here we are back with the main lens on both of these phones. And this is at 4K 30 frames per second. So I'll just go ahead and pan around here in the same scene so you can see how these cameras compare with the main lens side by side. Both of these are stabilized here at 4K. And they're both handling that really bright street light decently well, not flaring out too badly for how bright that is. And of course, these two main lenses are going to be brighter than the ultra wide angle lens because they're much larger sensors and they let in a lot more light. So let's go ahead and pan over this way and we'll start walking to that stabilization on both these phones here. And also we'll start moving over to a much darker area so we can try to test these cameras out in a little bit more difficult lighting situation versus that fairly well lit area back there. Also pay attention to any kind of jittering. That's pretty common in low light for the stabilization here. And as we round the corner here, it's definitely a lot darker. And in the viewfinder, the Nord 2 is brightening things up a lot more than the 11T. The sky is kind of like bluish on the OnePlus viewfinder there. If we pan up into the sky, it kind of adjusted the exposure there, but still pretty grainy, a little more bluish tint to it than the Xiaomi. And when we pan up here down this darkened alleyway, a little bit of a mixed lighting situation. You got some accent lights off this building here. See how that looks here on both these phones. So there you go, that's a 4K test here on the OnePlus Nord 2 and Xiaomi 11T. Everyone, so here's a low light camera test from the front facing cameras on the OnePlus Nord 2 and Xiaomi 11T. They're both recording for their max resolution and frame rate, which is 1080p 30 frames per second. I'm starting out in my usual testing spot with some pretty good lighting conditions so you can see how these front facing cameras can do, reproducing the best possible image quality in some fairly good light here. As you can see, lights to the left, to the right, and in the back of me right there. You can see how that front facing camera is doing right there. Let's go ahead and start walking so we can test stabilization, but also so we can move into a more difficult lighting conditions, a little bit darker area here, so you can see how these front-facing cameras do in a bit tougher light. I'll also be walking past a water fountain to my right so we can test out the microphones and how they handle that background noise against the sound of my voice here. And we'll pull up and pan around so you can see how these front-facing cameras do into a bunch of those really bright street lights behind me. And overall, not too bad. The 11T flaring those out a little bit more, but considering how bright those lights are, overall, not too bad there on both phones. And let's move here into this darker area so you can see what that looks like here side by side. And from what I'm seeing in the viewfinder, they're both definitely brightening this up a lot more than what I'm seeing with my own eyes. And really not too much noise here, both looking fairly decent. But that's going to do it for this camera comparison, I think, for the OnePlus Nord 2 and Xiaomi 11T. Again, both are using the same chipset, the Mediatek Dimensity 1200. And let me know what you thought about how each of these cameras performed. As for my high-level summary, I think for daytime, I thought the OnePlus Nord 2 more often than not probably had a little bit more sharper and more details than the 11T. But as far as color reproduction, if you're interested in that, I thought that went back and forth. Sometimes it was more natural looking on the OnePlus, sometimes more natural on the 11T, especially in the blues in the skies. And in low light performance, definitely the main camera went to the Nord 2 for me, that Sony IMX766. IMX766 definitely performed better in low light than the 11T, although the ultra-wide-angle camera on the Xiaomi 11T clearly performed better in low light than the Nord 2's ultra-wide-angle camera. And for front-facing camera overall, I preferred the OnePlus Nord 2. It just performed more consistently and was able to process the images better, especially into more harsher backlight. So that's just my quick thoughts on how these cameras performed and which ones I preferred and why. Well, let me know what you thought in the comments below. I'm always interested to hear what you have to say. If there's any questions about either of these phones I can help answer, leave them in the comments as well. And as always, thanks for watching.